This is the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast with your host, Jason Peck. That's right. What's up, you Gooshbags? Welcome into the Week 4 edition of the 2023 Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast, baby edition. I am your host, as always, the commissioner of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League, Jason Peck. That's me. And we are going to jump right in. We got the top scorer of the week this week and almost every week is Alexander Hamilton. Nakua Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Nakua Matata. That's right, boys. It's me again. 3 out of the 4 weeks this year, I have had the top score of the week. That's right. I'm the best. I'm the best. That's all there is. I'm the best. All right, let's move on. Last week's head-to-head results. That's right. We're moving on to the matchup reactions for week number 4. Matchup number 1, we've got Nakua Matata versus Mixin Match. And I've got week 5 pulled up accidentally. That's later in the show. Week 4, Nakua Matata versus Mixin Match. My God, I can't talk today. Mixin Match. Mix and match, like, you know, mix and match. Anyways, Nakua Matata took down Mix and Match 145.78 points to 106.2 fantasy points. And that was all on the back of Christian McCaffrey with 45.2 fantasy points on the backs of 4 total touchdowns. Just as good as that Achan and Raheem Mostert week. You know, Christian McCaffrey just does it all. He's a monster. Along with him, we had Justin Herbert, who put up 23.38 points. Kyron Williams, being a beast like he is, 26.2 fantasy points. And Puka Nacua with 26.8 fantasy points. And I was lucky to have those guys on my roster because, you know, I had the likes of Chris Olave, who only had 0.9 fantasy points. We have Darren Waller, who only had 3.6 fantasy points. So, like, and Aaron Jones, who only had 1.9. So it was rough in the streets for the rest of my team. But I did have a large amount of players score over 20 points, and that really, really significantly helped my matchup. This was the matchup of 4-0, and both me and Ryo were going into this week. Ryo and I were going into this week 4-0 each, and I guess, you know, the better team just won. So you lost for this week, Ryo. That's right. I called it last week, so, you know, it is what it is. But you had a big game out of Josh Allen, your quarterback this week. You had 36.5 fantasy points from him. And we had Chris Godwin at 15.4 and Nick Folk at 11. And those were your only 3 players who scored over 10 points. We had some disappointing games for the like of DeAndre Hopkins. Not the kicker, the wide receiver. Tyreek Hill, unfortunately, only had 8.7 fantasy points. Joe Mixon only had 8. Travis Etienne only had an 8 range. So not a very good week from the vast majority of your players. So that was kind of what did you in this week. I kind of had a half and half scenario. You had like 1 good week, 2 good weeks, I'd say. 2 good people on your team and the rest just kind of mediocre. So that's right. I'm the winner. That's right. All right, on to the next matchup. Matchup number 2, we've got Saquon You See versus my tight end Ertzwin Eifert. And this one was not a close matchup either. We had 128.2 fantasy points from Saquon You See and 97.62 fantasy points from my tight end Ertzwin Eifert. On Saquon's team, we've got Anthony Richardson with 29.6 fantasy points. He's been very good. Very good. We got Stephon Diggs actually leading the way with 33 fantasy points. Brandon Ayuk had a good day with 17.8 fantasy points. And those three guys just were monsters for you, and were able to put your team in the top half, at least, of the league in scoring this week. So congratulations to Saquon, you see. On the other side, my tight end Ertzwin Eifert, you did have a big day from Isaiah Pacheco, who he had 20 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown, as well as 3 catches for 43 yards. And DeAndre Swift and James Cook, so you had some pretty good running backs this week. But the rest of your team kind of disappointed you. We had Patrick Mahomes with only 13 fantasy points. You're hoping for more from him. And Miles Sanders with only 4.7 fantasy points. So not great from the rest of your team, in general. But, a couple of good weeks. You have some bright spots in your team, mostly the running backs. So congratulations. But you lost again. And I believe you're 0-4 now, so better turn things around quickly there, Buck. All right, on to matchup number 3. We've got Hold My Gibbs versus Jerry's Kids. And this one, I said the last one was a beatdown, and the first game was potentially a beatdown. This one, it was an obliteration. Hold My Gibbs only scored 52.4 fantasy points this week, and Jerry's Kids scored 145.38 fantasy points. That is only 0.4 points less than me, the highest scorer of the week. And he beat Hold My Gibbs by almost 100 fantasy points. It was 93 fantasy points, which is absolutely insane. I mean, there was only one bad player on Jerry's Kids. It was Deebo Samuel, who only had 0.6 fantasy points. Everybody else, like, half your team was in the 20s. Or no. Actually, it wasn't even that absurd. Like, DJ Moore had 23, and Mark Andrews had 22.5, and Justin Jefferson had 23.5. And then, like, you just had, like, average games from everybody else. Like, Trevor Lawrence had 16. Alvin Kamara had 14.9. Kenneth Walker had 13.9. And Christian Kirk had 12.4. And you got 18 points from your kicker, so that helped. But, like, I don't know. I just feel like I guess this is an example of nobody busting, and that, almost giving you enough to have the highest points in the league this week. But so good work on your part. 145.38 fantasy points. Now, this is the fun part. Did anybody on Hold My Gibbs score in the double digits? Yes, we had one. We had Terry McLaurin putting up 18.6 fantasy points, and this kicker, Harrison Butker, putting up 11 fantasy points, and everybody else was just atrocious. Jerick McKinnon, no zeros. Jerick McKinnon did have 0.7 fantasy points. We had Kyle Pitts with 3.1, Quentin Johnston with 2.3, Jackson Smith and Jigba with 2. Like, your team is just looking terrible right now, and I don't know what sort of state you were in when you drafted, but it was not a good draft for you, Chad. Not one of your best. So, let's move on. Matchup number four, we've got Ridley's Roulette versus Team Go Clifford. And this one was the closest matchup of the week. Team Go Clifford put up 104.78 fantasy points to Ridley's Roulette's 92.78 fantasy points. And this was close. It was 12. It was still, you still beat him by more than 12 points, but, or actually exactly 12 points. But, this number has changed. It's 104.74. I wonder if that was a stat correction, maybe on Lamar Jackson. Either way, it got you the victory here. You had 104.78 fantasy points. So on the back of Lamar Jackson putting up 28.14 fantasy points, we've got Devontae Adams with 11.5. And AJ Brown. I completely buried the lead. AJ Brown had 34 fantasy points. I was about to say, how'd you even get to 100 with kind of the rest of these numbers? We had James Conner with 6, Ramondre with 5, Rashid Rice with 4.7, like Tutu Atwell only had 4.9, like not very good, but the rest of your team was able to balance that out. On the other side, Jared Goff only put up 11 fantasy points. And let's see who else had a big game. Derrick Henry had 23.88. He bounced back. At least Calvin Ridley had 10.8. He did have a touchdown, but he only had 2 catches for 38 yards. George Kittle at 1.4. And this is a rare non-injury goose from Jordan Addison. So he's, just watching the skies, looking for the geese. They're out there. And Jordan Addison was one of them this week. We had Adam Thielen, who was only 11 point, who's scored 11.7 fantasy points this week, 7 of 8 for 76 yards, and one carry for 6 yards. And yeah, Jordan Addison just wasn't involved this week, so very strange. But yeah, so Adam Thielen's replacement, Jordan Addison, not very involved. All right, on to matchup number 5. We've got... Come on, back out. We've got Brandon Cooks versus my Metcalf Hurts. And my Metcalf Hurts took down Brandon Cooks 116.56 to 89.58 fantasy points. So a big week from Neil's team this week. We've got Jalen Hurts putting up 24.16 fantasy points. Josh Jacobs bouncing back, getting 23.9 fantasy points. Cole Kmet with 24.1 fantasy points. And Gabe Davis putting up 13 fantasy points. That's pretty solid. That's a pretty solid crew right there. Joshua Kelly kind of disappointed with 6.5. Amari Cooper definitely disappointed with 2.1. He had some good games, good players, had some bad players, but your team did put up 116 fantasy points, so that's pretty good. On the other side, Tua only put up 14 fantasy points. Brian Robinson was 16 fantasy points. Devonta Smith, 11.3, and Tyler Bass with 14 fantasy points. Everybody else was kind of a bummer. Jerome Ford, Michael Pittman, Michael Pittman. And TJ Hawkinson was kind of a bummer this week. So you did put Justin Fields on your bench this week for Tua Tagovailoa, or last week, I should say, and that backfired. I don't know if you'd have won. No, you wouldn't have. It was only 14 points. You wouldn't have won, but it would have made a much closer matchup. You did put Nico Collins on your bench for some reason over Zach Moss. Ridiculous. He better be in your lineup now because that's just plain nonsense, Brandon. That's the name. Let Brandon Cooks. Courts, that's a disgrace. Put Nico Collins in your lineup. All right, that's all the matchups that we've got this week. Next, we're moving on to our weekly awards. The best team for this week, as I told you guys, was me. The worst team was Chad with the 52 fantasy points. That was terrible. 52.4. The most efficient manager was Benaya, who put up 128 of 130 possible points. We had Chad Keen as the underachiever, the least efficient manager, 52.4 fantasy points. That's a little foreshadowing for you. 52.4 points. The highest points in a loss was Ryo with 106.2 fantasy points, and the lowest points in the win was James with 104.74. So it was close. The matchups were close to where things are supposed to be. The top 6 scorers win, and the bottom 6 scorers lose. But it wasn't quite that way this week. We got biggest blowout was Brandon Metzler. Congratulations, you played against Chad. Anybody playing against Chad would have had the biggest blowout this week. The narrowest victory was James, of course, because he did have the lowest scoring victory. The underachiever this week was Chad, of course. Worst team in the league. He only scored 52 fantasy points. The overachiever was Brandon because he was not expected to score as many as me, so he didn't. So congratulations. All right, on to the Week 5 matchups.
Next week's matchup predictions.
I can see the future! I have to stop you from destroying my race! In the future!
We already did that.
I knew you'd do that!
That's right, I know how everything is supposed to go. Week 5 matchups. the matchup number 1 is Nakua Matata versus Team Go Clifford. Now, Nakua Matata does have Justin Herbert on bye this week, so unfortunately, the number 1 scoring quarterback cannot help me. I was going to say him. I was going to talk in third person, but cannot help me this week. So I got CJ Stroud in, who has been a monster so far this year. So hopefully things continue with him. We got Christian McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Puka Nakua, of course. Garrett Wilson in a very plus matchup against Denver. We got Darren Waller versus Miami. He's also been bad, but Darren Waller against Miami, hopefully that's a salve for whatever the heck is going on in New York. We got CeeDee Lamb versus San Francisco and Aaron Jones versus the Raiders. And we'll see if Aaron Jones goes. He's questionable, limited at practice. Kyron Williams also limited at practice, but they're expecting him to go. So we should be good on that. On the other side of the ball, we got Lamar Jackson. We got James Conner. We've got Damian Pierce, Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown versus Cincinnati, Evan Ingram, Tutu Atwell. So we'll see which of the players behind Cooper Kupp scores better this week. We got Puka Nakua versus Tutu Atwell in the same matchup. We got A.J. Brown, who put up a monster week last week. And we got Young Hoi Koo in the kicker position. I, as always, am picking myself. Let's go. Matchup number 2, we've got... Ooh, this one's already started, and it's very exciting already. Oh, Saquon, you see... versus Hold My Gibbs. Hold My Gibbs. And this one has gotten off to a hot start on the Thursday night game. We got Brian Robinson on team O Saquon UC, putting up 6.3 fantasy points on Thursday night. And the other side of the ball on Hold My Gibbs, we got Terry McLaurin, who's put up 6.9 fantasy points. Yeah, it's a barn burner so far, so we'll see how this one finishes up. But right now, Saquon UC is projected to win by 30 fantasy points over Hold My Gibbs. On Saquon UC, we've got Anthony Richardson, we've got Raheem Mostert, Brian Robinson, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Sam Laporta, Brandon Ayuk, Alexander Madison. We got Saquon Barkley on the bench right now, but there's a possibility that he plays. If he plays, I would play him for sure. Probably over Alexander Madison. We got on Hold My Gibbs side, we got Joe Burrow still starting for some reason over Jordan Love. I don't know that I would do that right now. We got Cam Akers, Jahmyr Gibbs, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, Kyle Pitts, Javonte. No, that's Jamison Williams. I was looking at it thinking it was a freaking running back because those are all the J Williams I know. But this is Jamison Williams for Detroit. We've got Luke Musgraves and Harrison Butker. Yeah, I like Saquon UC for this matchup. We don't even know if Higgins is going to go. You got a rough, Chad. I don't know. I guess you already won a match, but I don't know how you're going to win another one this year. Matchup number 3, we've got Ridley's Roulette versus Let Brandon Cooks. Let him cooks indeed. Ridley's Roulette is projected to win this by approximately 7 points, 105-98. Jared Goff on Ridley's Roulette is the quarterback leading the way. No other quarterback in this matchup or on your roster, so you're stuck with Jared Goff versus Carolina. I don't think that's going to be a good week this week. We got Derrick Henry versus the Colts, which could be really good. We got Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is questionable. He's still got he had something else that wasn't foot issues, an abdomen issue. So he's potentially got turf toe and some sort of abdomen injury. He may or may not be going, as well as Devontae Adams. I think he seems to be trending towards... He didn't practice Thursday with his shoulder injury. I think he dislocated his shoulder in the game last week. So we'll see if those two players go. If not, it might be tougher sledding for your team this week. You could get the loss. If St. Brown and Adams are out, then I'm taking Let Brandon Cooks. But if those players are in, I'm gonna say Ridley's Roulette wins this matchup. On Let Brandon Cook's side, we do have Tua Tagovailoa, Bijan Robinson. We've got Zach Moss. We've got Michael Pittman. We've got Nico Collins, T.J. Hawkinson, Devonta Smith. We got Breece Hall and Tyler Bass. And he does have Jonathan Taylor waiting in the wings this week. And he sat Justin Fields again. He learned nothing last week. He learned nothing. So Justin Fields on his bench after he put up 32 fantasy points in week 4. So Courts, that's unfortunate. Like I said, if the injuries lean your way this week, I'll give you the W because you do have Breece Hall versus Denver. You have Michael Pittman versus Tennessee. Some pretty good matchups for some of your players, and I've got you winning if Amon-Ra and Devontae Adams are out. Otherwise, I got Ridley's Roulette in this matchup. Matchup number 4, we've got my tight end Ertz versus Mix and Match. My tight end Ertz when Eifert is projected to win 111 to 97.84. My tight end Ertz has Patrick Mahomes, DeAndre Swift, Isaiah Pacheco, Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, Travis Kelce, Miles Sanders, James Cook, and Justin Tucker playing this week. All kind of like average to below average matchups. On the other side, Mix and Match has Josh Allen, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Hunter Henry, Chris Godwin on a bye. You better check your lineup before you wreck your lineup. We've got Javonte Williams, who is questionable this week, and I guess he did do a limited practice Thursday, so we'll see if he plays. But you do have David Montgomery on your bench for some reason. I would play him over Chris Godwin. I mean, Chris Godwin's out, so I would play anybody over Chris Godwin. But other than that, your backups don't look appetizing. I got my tight end Ertzwin Eifert is gonna get his first victory this week because Mix and Match is gonna lose, but just this week. On to matchup number 5, we've got my Metcalf Hurts versus Jerry's Kids, and this one has already been off to a massive start. Unlike the other one, Jerry's Kids is projected to win 140.51 to my Metcalf Hurts 89.25. And this is because last night, for some reason in his flex position, Brandon played DJ Moore. Now, I'm on record saying that I thought that last week was going to be DJ Moore's best game of his career. Not because he's bad, but just because he's always, for some reason, playing for a bad team that can't pass the ball. And I thought the Bears were that. Now, last night, it didn't look like they were that. They scored 40 points, and literally 100% of the wide receiver receiving yards and catches went to DJ Moore. There was not a single other wide receiver that had a catch in this game. DJ Moore went nuts. 230 yards, 3 touchdowns on 8 catches. Absolutely bonkers. 45 fantasy points to kick things off for Jerry's Kids. Fortunately, I don't think Deebo Samuel or Trevor Lawrence is going to have a rough day. But he doesn't have a choice because Deshaun Watson's on bye. Mark Andrews versus Pittsburgh. It's probably a fine matchup. Alvin Kamara, Devon A-Chain, Justin Jefferson, Najee Harris, not very good, honestly. So, outside of the fact that DJ Moore had a great game, I don't know if anybody else is actually going to reach what they're projected this week, except for Devon A-Chain, probably, maybe Alvin Kamara. I think the rest of it's going to be rough. And if you hadn't already gotten 45 fantasy points from DJ Moore, I would say you would lose this matchup because on the other side, we've got Jaleel McLaughlin making his starter debut on Team My Metcalf Hurts. We've got Josh Jacobs, Romeo Doubs, Drake London, Cole Kmet, Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson, and Jason Sanders. Now you're just unlucky because you have like all of your players in bye right now. You have Metcalf, Cooper, Rashad White, and Austin Eckler, who has been hurt, but he's on bye as well. So yeah, I got you losing this one just because you got off to such a hot start with DJ Moore. However, I would have projected that both of these teams would have probably put up like 90 fantasy points at the most. So I have Jerry's kids winning this matchup. All right, guys. That is week number 4 edition of the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast. I hope you guys are looking forward to me once again scoring the most fantasy points of the week, because it will happen. And I'm going to make my money back before week 6, and then I'm going to take all of your guys' money as well by continuing to win and then winning the championship this year. I wish I could also get the second and the third place prizes, because I feel like my team deserves it right now with how dominant of a performance we're putting up. So that's right.
Boom shakalaka!
You're darn right, boys. All right. On that note, I'm out of here. You guys have a good weekend of some more football. I'm very much looking forward to, and I will see you guys next week. See you guys. Have a good weekend.